A cataclysmic event over 2.5 million years ago changed the face of human history. It transformed our world forever and plunged us into a frozen planet.
This is the story of the Ice Age, where mega beasts roam and early humans face a daily desperate battle for survival.
It's easy to imagine just what the Ice Age might have looked like. It's harsh, inhospitable, and it's a challenging environment. What caused the Ice Age in the first place? What sort of creatures lived in a world that looked like this most of the time? And the biggest question of all, could it ever happen again?
It's an environment devastating and deadly to so many. But some creatures adapted to survive and even thrive in this harsh new world.
Michaela Strachan and I will be stepping back in time to reveal how humans managed to survive this frozen world and set our earliest ancestors on the path to becoming modern humans. I'm Steve Backshall.
Welcome to the epic story of the Ice Age.
In this episode, we witness a new species emerge. Our direct ancestors, the Homo Sapiens. And I dive back into the Ice Age in search of a sunken Atlantis.
This is Steve. We appear to have lost you.
Ask if our planet could be plunged into a new Ice Age.
So this kind of scenario is really the basis for these apocalyptic predictions, and we could plummet into Ice Age-like conditions.
We discover how early humans faced an existential crisis as the Ice Age comes to a close and a new threat emerges.
One that could wipe out our entire species. The Great Thaw is coming.
The people of the Ice Age were highly skilled hunters. The prey they hunted was prized as a valuable resource, their hides used for clothing and bones for tools. A successful hunt could feed a Neanderthal community for days, but it could come at a cost. While animals like deer were the most common prey, we know Ice Age humans sometimes hunted larger creatures and took on massive woolly mammoths.
James, any conversation about Ice Age peoples is pretty quickly going to turn to hunting.
It's the view that we always have of prehistoric people. How did they hunt their prey? So for something dangerous like a mammoth or a woolly rhino, they would have to come up with some kind of strategy of cornering these animals, or at least putting them in a position that they could get close. Once you're using tools like this to get close and engage with these animals, it's going to be brutal. There's going to be all sorts of injury, which we see in the skeletal record of Neanderthal. It's going to be gory. Clearly there'll be some planning involved. You might know some particular points where those groups of animals can be driven into, like a bottleneck or a corral.
Something like a mammoth or a rhino, that's going to need the whole clan together. Everything's got to be right. I've been charged by elephants on more than one occasion. They've been some of the most frightening moments of my life. I've also been up close enough to know that that hide is really thick, and to get through it with a spear is a big ask. To get through it with enough spears to actually kill a mammoth, that is a Herculean task.
Neanderthal hunters spent their lives observing and tracking. They knew their prey intimately. But hunting a large beast like a mammoth required great skill and daring, especially as they preferred to get up close and use spears as a thrusting weapon.
Chris, you said they were built to be more sprinters than marathon runners. So did that affect the way they hunt?
They were mostly confrontational hunters, so they would get close into their prey and maybe stab them with spears.
More of an ambush hunter?
Yes, maybe ambush hunters, requiring tremendous physical strength, but also incredible bravery to get in close to these dangerous big animals, trying to dispatch it before it dispatches you.
An angered mammoth, using giant tusks as weapons, could easily inflict injury or even death. To gain advantage, Homo sapien hunters preferred to use spears as thrown weapons, giving them benefit of distance as they approached their prey. Isolating and targeting weaker juveniles would be much easier and safer than taking on a fully grown adult.
So what can you tell me about the spears themselves? These 3 different examples here, is that a pretty good idea of what we'd be looking at?
It's a nice selection. We've got the earliest, almost going through to the latest, but the reason I've got these 3 is because they've got quite different tips to them.
The first spears were straight branches with sharpened tips. Neanderthals progressed to spears with a notch cut at one end to hold a flint. Neanderthals knew how to make a glue made of birch bark tar. They could fix the flint in place. But in a landscape where long, straight sticks of wood were scarce, this design had an inherent weakness. A flint wedged in the top could split the valuable shaft on impact. Homo sapiens solved this by introducing a shaft tipped with a split piece of deer antler. Here the impact would only shatter the antler spearhead, not the precious wood, letting them use the shaft time and time again.
What I want to really see is how these things fly.
Fortunately, there aren't any mammoths in the vicinity. So I'm going to lob spears at a stationary target. Can't be that hard, right?
Keep the tip above your shoulder, slightly pointing upwards. Step through and drive with your arm.
I just overcooked it! Oh, it's there! It's in!
Nice shot.
What do you think? Should we try the antler?
I think we should try the antler, just to see if it will act as the fuse and protect the valuable spear shaft.
Oh, the point's in. That's exactly what you said would happen. That's in perfectly.
This is exactly where this dangerous fuse is doing its job. The spear shaft is in perfect condition, and this is still usable, so clearly they're exploring ideas with this new material, antler, that we see with the arrival of modern humans.
Homo sapiens go on to develop even more specialised hunting tools, like harpoons, fishhooks, and the bow and arrow. Innovations like these slowly helped establish a lead over their Neanderthal cousins. But could competition for the same resources have tipped these 2 species into bloodshed? There's very little proof Neanderthals and Homo sapiens fought against each other, but when archaeologists unearthed 10 Neanderthal skeletons buried in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, they were intrigued. One of them had a deep cut on his ribs, evidence he was viciously impaled in the chest, almost certainly collapsing his lung. Experiments show it may have been inflicted by a Homo sapien spear. But if this was a rare sign of interspecies violence, the Homo sapiens' better weapons weren't the only reason Neanderthals were left out in the cold.
We don't know exactly what early humans wore in the Ice Age. Popular films and TV have given us lots of ideas that aren't necessarily correct. Where in the past, accuracy wasn't always given top billing, a lot of costume designers today really strive for authenticity. I'm joining James and costume designer Camille to discuss Ice Age fashion. So Camille, if you were doing this for costume drama, how would you make it look?
As you can see, we have 2 layers here. We have the hide, which is what would keep you dry, your undercoat. And then we'd have the top coat, would be the fur, would be the insulation.
What is that, deer hide?
It's deer hide, and Neanderthals may well have used tools like a scraper to take off the membrane and the fat from the inside of the hide and then work it so it's nice and soft before it was handed over to someone to turn into a piece of clothing.
The basic Ice Age ensemble got a dramatic refit with the introduction of a new invention about 50,000 years ago. An invention we still rely on today.
the humble sewing needle.
Once the needle came into play, you could diversify what you made. So instead of it just being an overlay poncho like this, the maker could get more creative, more technical, even back then.
The needle brought with it an evolution of Ice Age clothing, one that would improve Homo sapiens' chances of survival.
So this is an Ice Age parka then, isn't it? And what's this made out of?
So this is reindeer skin, so this is utilising all of the natural characteristics of reindeer skin, being very thick, hollow hairs, can be made to be very soft, so it's very, very comfortable to wear.
The seams are now introduced, the seams that we know and love today in modern clothing. The seams, you've got seams are sewn, they're all stitched.
It's actually incredibly warm. I mean, I would never wear fur now, but you can see that when there's no alternative back then, that this was an incredibly practical thing to wear. If you were making this for a costume drama, would you use these days a sewing machine?
For a piece like this would be handmade because you have more accuracy and you have more control of the garment. And then it creates more of an authentic feel. And I know makers prefer to work with leather and fur by hand, using hand tools.
So would you say that in the evolution of the human species, the needle was more important than the spear?
Better clothing almost certainly allows you to move into trickier landscapes that climatically might be quite challenging, so they can exploit new resources and just move into new territory.
Warm clothing is an advantage that lets Homo sapiens spread out into new areas. Without them, Neanderthals were forced to remain behind, close to their European homelands. Neanderthals were tough. They'd already survived hundreds of thousands of years. But some 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals, the great iconic Ice Age people, perform an incredible disappearing act.
So James, I've learned so much about Neanderthals, gained so much respect for their abilities, their resourcefulness, their physical prowess. But something went wrong, didn't it? Because we're here and they're not. What are the main drivers of their extinction?
I guess we can look at us to begin with. We moved out of Africa and in various waves from about 70 to 50,000 years ago started to move into areas like Europe, home of the Neanderthals. As those modern humans are coming into Europe, Neanderthals can't easily go north very much because although they're quite well adapted to the cold, they don't have fitted clothing. They're leaving those more hostile environments to these Homo sapiens. They were just ending up in smaller and smaller bands that were cut off from each other.
We have evidence in their last 20 or 30,000 years that Neanderthal numbers were low from their genetic diversity. They were even being forced into doing a bit of inbreeding in some cases, which is obviously not good for the gene pool.
Wouldn't they have had the advantage over Homo sapiens?
Yeah, I think in terms of physical strength, the Neanderthals would have had the advantage in a wrestling match. But modern humans, at least in this overlap period, started to innovate more in their technology than the Neanderthals did. And I think gradually modern humans secured an advantage. So modern humans are growing their numbers and spreading. The Neanderthals were in trouble and going under.
Under pressure, and with food getting harder to find, the adaptations that served Neanderthals well in the past might have started to count against them.
As the climate changed and as there was more competition for food, their demand for more calories just became excessive. They couldn't deal with it.
Yeah, and we know that Neanderthals are fantastic burst runners, but they're expensive to run.
That knowledge that they may have required 3,000 to 5,000 calories a day, and as prey became more scarce, finding that amount of food also would have been a bigger challenge.
Whereas Homo sapiens are a lot more lithe, they're better running longer distances, much better suited to tracking herds of animals over a greater distance, whereas Neanderthals with their explosive sprinting power and heavy impact are just not suited to that setup. And if they're not prepared or able to adapt their strategy or even their tools and hunting equipment, they're going to struggle.
So James, 40,000 years ago, in the midst of one of the harshest, most savage periods of cold, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals are already in conflict that the Neanderthals are probably losing, and then something big happens.
So around 40,000 years ago, there was this major event off the coast of Naples, which is an area we know of for big volcanic activity.
12 miles west of Pompeii lies an area of volcanic activity called the Phlegrean Fields. 40,000 years ago, there was an eruption here that would cause mass devastation.
It was the largest in the last 200,000 years. Volcanologists class volcanic explosivity on an index. 8 is the top, almost world-ending. This was 7, so pretty intense.
The eruption threw out 60 cubic miles of magma. Its ash cloud was huge. Particles reached as far as Asia. For the Neanderthals living in Europe, this was a terrifying apocalyptic disaster, plunging their world into darkness.
Now imagine that impact on modern humans and Neanderthals living close by. It would have completely wiped out large areas of environment that were now covered in ash. There would have been a severe impact that would have killed a huge number of animals and almost certainly humans as well.
With numbers dwindling and fewer animals to eat, as a species they were on their knees, victims of a long chain of events that was slowly wiping them out.
It's a big headline and it's exciting and it's explosive, but it didn't kill all the Neanderthals off. So although we know it wasn't the absolute death nail, it was just a stroke of severe bad luck that they definitely didn't need.
Rather than this being an abrupt end, it was a long, slow, drawn-out conclusion.
As they enter their endgame, it's believed the last Neanderthals were eking out an existence in caves in Gibraltar, subsisting on birds and shellfish. They cling on till around 24,000 years ago, and then it's all over.
It gives you even more of a sense of quite how resourceful Homo Sapiens was, that they managed to survive through that. And that all these challenges that were facing Neanderthals, they were facing them too, but yet we managed to survive and to thrive. And with the Neanderthals gone, it's opened the door for the age of the modern human.
And it led to an explosion in artwork and archaeology that we see around Europe and in caves and gorges just like this.
Now Homo sapiens are free to rise, and we discover their culture was surprisingly complex. They left us tantalizing glimpses of their way of life. Through their art, we gain a window into their world. And not just artistic expression, they left behind evidence that hints at some kind of belief in an afterlife and rituals that celebrate the dead. Many skeletons have been found covered in beads and carved shells, carefully handcrafted using tiny pieces of flint. They're all that remains of finely decorated burial shrouds that disintegrated long ago.
These are some of the first pieces of accessories that we see that were probably attached to clothing by Homo sapiens. They're found in their thousands in burials covering people from head to toe.
It just fascinates me that this was done so long ago and done with such intricacy and such detail and such precision.
They must have really valued them then because it took them so much time.
What impresses me is that the effort, the detail, the intricacy, this is proof that people were not just clinging to the edge of survival. They had spare time to invest into learning and trading and making these amazing garments that might have just been for burial rather than something they were worn every day, because it's not terribly practical to have thousands of beads on you to rattle around if you're going on a hunt for a mammoth.
These ways of honouring the dead see humans striving for something beyond the realm of everyday survival. But some of their rituals are truly challenging to us today. Not least those found here in Gough's Cave in Cheddar Gorge, where human remains were found dating back 15,000 years.
When you look at the remains, there's actually very, very clear evidence that they were cannibalised. We can see human tooth marks where they've chewed at bits of bone. We can see cut marks on these bones where they would have been defleshed using a sharp object.
There's been a great deal of focus on one particular find, a drinking vessel with a gruesome tale to tell.
The strongest evidence for ritualistic cannibalism that we see here is the forming of these skull cups. So this is where the back of the head is very, very carefully removed. The cavity is cleaned out completely and it's turned into a drinking bowl. It's a very sophisticated process. There's many different reasons that people turn to a cannibalistic behaviour. It can be because they're just hungry, but it can also be a ritualistic behaviour. It can actually be about honouring the dead, taking in your ancestors.
As shocking as they are, these ancient ways may never be fully understood. But modern science is helping us explore other mysteries. DNA is fast becoming one of the most exciting tools helping scientists unravel the secrets of the past. One of the leading centres of this cutting-edge science is the Crick Institute in London.
Anders, being able to look at ancient DNA is a new and really exciting scientific technique. How much has that revolutionised our understanding of human evolution? I mean, particularly from Neanderthals to us Homo sapiens.
So with ancient DNA, we can go back, almost like time travel, go back and sequence the genomes of individual people who lived in the past and study them directly. So that gives you a whole other window into the past.
Back in 1903 in Cheddar Gorge, a 10,000-year-old fossilised human skeleton was also found in Gough's Cave. Cheddar Man is the oldest complete Homo sapiens skeleton ever found in Britain. He was a hunter-gatherer who lived at a time when Britain was emerging out of the Ice Age. Recently, scientists at the Crick Institute got hold of samples from Cheddar Man's bones, and they were able to extract his 10,000-year-old DNA. Incredibly, they used the data locked within it to reconstruct his face. His dark complexion and deep blue eyes gaze at us from a time long past. It's a remarkable, striking image of what our ancient Homo sapien ancestors might have looked like. But DNA science is allowing us to go further back in time, revolutionising what we know about our long-lost cousins, the Neanderthals. It seems they might be gone, but not forgotten.
Previously, people who had studied fossils had seen that Neanderthal fossils were quite distinct and separated from modern human skeletons, and so most people thought that there was no interbreeding between these groups. It was really a huge surprise when, using these ancient genomes, you could see that there actually was interbreeding from Neanderthals into modern humans. And it really changes our way of thinking about Neanderthals and our relationship to Neanderthals. We met them, we interacted, we don't know exactly how much or the nature of those interactions, but we could also produce fertile offspring. You could have people who are half Neanderthal, half modern human.
So how much DNA do we share with Neanderthals?
So it was found that something like 2% of the DNA of people outside of Africa and lower amounts inside of Africa derives from Neanderthals. So our ancestors must have met with and had children with Neanderthals, probably at some point like 50 to 60,000 years ago, and that DNA still lives on in us today.
Well, Steve, we've learned an awful lot about Neanderthals and how they were outcompeted by Homo sapiens. But I think the most remarkable revelation is just how much they interacted to the point that they interbred.
As recently as when I was doing my degree, the idea that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals would have interbred would have been a radical one. We knew they were around at the same time, but any interaction was believed to be destructive conflict, no more.
And yet new science is proving that we carry 2% of Neanderthal DNA, anyone outside of Africa.
The Ice Age was a time of dramatic change. Over the last 40,000 years, the Neanderthals died out, and megabeasts like the mammoth went extinct. With the loss of giant herbivores, saber-toothed cats are unable to adapt to hunting smaller prey, and disappeared off the face of the Earth. Homo sapiens are on the rise, but face their biggest challenge yet, as the planet's environment goes through phenomenal changes.
Dr. Mark Furs is one of the world's leading glacial experts, and from his base in Svalbard, deep in the Arctic Circle, he can see real-world examples of just how big the changes must have been at the end of the Ice Age.
So, Mark, just over 11,000 years ago, this is what most of the UK and the Northern Hemisphere looked like. But then there was a dramatic change in the climate, and it was the beginning of the end of this Ice Age. What happened?
Our climate starts warming. We see increasing amounts of energy coming to the Earth because of the orbital cycle shifts.
And that's because the Earth's orbit changes and our planet gets closer to the sun.
So we see contraction of the ice sheets. Sea levels rise. Places that were large land masses now become isolated as islands or completely flooded. We see northward migration of our forests into the tundra as the ice sheets retreat back north and eventually disappear to leave the Greenland ice sheet and the ice over Scandinavia that we see today.
What about humans? How hard was it for us to adapt to those changes?
These changes were happening relatively slowly. Early on, though, that sea level rise is really dramatic because a lot of these areas of the continental shelf are relatively flat. So if you're a hunter-gatherer, you went back to your favorite site for foraging on the seashore, over your lifespan, you're going to see dramatic changes in that. We see the tundra being replaced by coniferous forests and then broadleaf forests as the climate warms.
A warmer climate helped humanity. Huge swathes of land became more fertile, and early humans flourished as they spread across Europe, Asia, and into Britain. The hardship they endured at the peak of the Ice Age appeared to be ending, and early humans capitalized on this respite to make staggering leaps forward in their development. Some of these were only discovered in the 1930s, with the greatest collection being located in the Luna Valley, southern Germany. It's here the foundations for civilization as we know it were laid.
The more I learn about our early ancestors, the more respect I have for them. The hardships they went through every day, the resourcefulness, their tenacity. But around 40,000 years ago, there's evidence of a real step forward, a renaissance for Ice Age people, and the development of sophisticated culture.
I'm visiting the globally renowned Hollenstein Hole. Discoveries made here have rewritten the book on our Stone Age ancestors.
This is super impressive.
It is. You are at one of the most important sites of Stone Age archaeology.
Dr. Yvonne Tafelmeyer is at the forefront of archaeological finds in the region.
It's no exaggeration to say that this place and the findings from here changed everything.
Yes. Around 42,000 years ago, we have the first evidence of arriving modern humans that spread from the Near East into Europe.
If I was an Ice Age human, this is where I'd be heading. I can imagine this being a really welcoming place, particularly during the harshest periods. They would have had everything. Shelter, water, probably mammoths to hunt as well.
Yeah.
What was back there behind these bars?
This is the place where the very famous Lion Man was found.
Sculpted from mammoth ivory, Lion Man is a 40,000-year-old masterpiece. Standing 31 centimeters tall, it has the body of a human, but mysteriously it has the head of a lion.
The Lion Man is legendary in archaeology, but also, in popular culture as well.
The story of Lion Man's discovery wouldn't be out of place in an Indiana Jones film. Broken shards of Lion Man were uncovered by Nazi archaeologists in the summer of 1939. They wanted to prove that human culture began in Ice Age Germany and show the world the superiority of the Aryan race. But the outbreak of the Second World War got in the way, and the ivory fragments sat neglected in a cigar box until 2009, when all of the ivory shards were finally pieced together, revealing the astonishing Lion Man figure.
Most art of that period is things that people have seen. It's the animals they hunt or the things that they had for breakfast. But this is creative. It's taking an animal that they respect and fear and sticking it on a person's body to create some kind of superhero. It's like Spider-Man or Catwoman. I think that's such a modern thing to do.
Unbelievably, replicas show it would have taken a staggering 400 hours for someone to intricately carve Lion Man. That's 6 weeks of someone not hunting for food and instead prioritizing making art.
We have an explosion of art at 40,000 years that comes with modern humans into Europe.
It's a big step up in the way that people perceive the world around them.
Yeah, really special.
Some of the most astonishing early human discoveries found anywhere in the world are stored down the road at the Museum of Prehistory. Giving me a grand tour is Dr. Guido Battil, a prehistory archaeologist.
I'm learning about how hard, how tough Ice Age life was, and yet somehow the people still had time for art.
Yeah, the typical art we know here are figurines, which show the animals living during this time period.
This is a great leap forward from just purely existing and surviving to making a step towards culture, craft, art.
Yes, from this point of time they needed new ways of communication, maybe to tell the children what is important in their life. And they not only produced arts objects, they even produced musical instruments.
What could be more human than the creation of music? This Ice Age flute is made from the wing bone of a griffon vulture. At around 40,000 years old, it's one of the earliest and most complete musical instruments discovered anywhere on the planet. Guido's going to show me a replica crafted from bird bone.
That is quite something. Can I try?
Yes, of course.
That is unspectacular. Yeah, there must be an...
And you have to close the holes.
Oh, okay. There's the sound of the Ice Age right there. Just wind blowing.
Assuming early humans were better musicians than me, ancient flutes and music probably helped early humans communicate and form closer social bonds. And one item recovered from the region has certainly got us modern humans talking. It's time to unveil the museum's most unusual artifact.
This is a worked siltstone tool from about 30,000 years ago. It also has a line carved around the end which transforms it into a symbol which you just can't miss. This is clearly a phallus.
Only discovered in 2005, the Ice Age phallus was probably used for flint knapping, the process of making stone tools. But experts can't rule out it having a dual purpose.
This is always a powerful symbol. Every single culture that I've ever seen or worked with has some kind of phallic symbol.
And it usually relates to fertility. But the real star of the collection is the so-called Venus of Hollefels. It's the oldest known depiction of the female form discovered anywhere in the world. It's 40,000 years old, carved from mammoth ivory, and is priceless.
Wow. It's so timeless. It just transports you back in time.
The figure's exaggerated breasts were likely a symbol of fertility, and it's thought that it was worn around the neck as an amulet. Perhaps this is the origin of jewellery and a sign that even 40,000 years ago, we all craved to stand out from the crowd.
For me, what's really important about this is we don't tend to make art when we're starving hungry and freezing cold. Somebody had a full stomach and a story to tell.
It shows that Ice Age people were ready to leave the grinding tiredness of just surviving and move into a more enlightened age.
But this is just the calm before the storm. An early human development was threatened as the Ice Age ended 10,000 years ago.
We now know that the clock was ticking on this Ice Age world, and in time, the humans living on it would face huge upheaval, a massive turning point, after which there would be no turning back. Haysborough Beach in Norfolk is one of the world's greatest Ice Age archaeological sites. This vast expanse of sea stretches for miles from the English Channel to the North Sea and beyond to Scandinavia. But just take a look at this. This is an Ice Age hand axe. And an object similar to this was found at the bottom of the North Sea, brought to the surface by fishing nets. And that object helped to tell the story of an environmental catastrophe, an event on an unimaginable scale that transformed the world of the Ice Age. In fact, we're still living in the aftermath of that disaster today because it shaped the British Isles. Long ago, all this water was dry land, and it connected us to Europe and beyond. It was a vast, long-lost realm called Doggerland. It's hard to believe, but just 10,000 years ago, the North Sea was a heavily wooded area with marshlands and rivers running across it. But has any evidence of this Ice Age world survived, or have centuries of sea movements eroded away any trace Doggerland ever existed? We're in the beautiful coastal town of Lymington in Hampshire to discover more about this sunken land. So, Steve, how much do you already know about Doggerland?
What I knew of it was the area of what we know as the North Sea, and that was once a marshland that would have enabled people to wander from what is now the UK to Europe, but is now completely flooded.
You're going to learn a lot more about it. I mean, you're diving it. I'm going to stay warm and I'm going to stay on land. And I'm meeting some geologists. I'm going to learn about the history of Doggerland. And you can bring me back some artefacts.
I'm excited to dive down and see Doggerland for myself. Guiding me through this aqua land is Gary Momba, a leading marine archaeologist who I hope will help me uncover signs of an ancient forest, now submerged under the English Channel.
Gary, hi.
Hi, Steve.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Visibility might be a bit murky, but that's fine. We're going to see a wonderful sight today.
All adds to the atmosphere.
It does, and it takes you back there to the mystery of 8,000–10,000 years ago when people lived in a land that's now drowned.
Right, shall we?
Skipper's happy? Let's go.
While Steve heads to the dive site, I'm investigating just how big this underwater Atlantis actually was. Top geoarchaeologist Dr. Claire Mellett has been researching Doggerland for the last 15 years and can help me understand this mysterious sunken land.
Claire, there's so much I want to learn about this ancient Ice Age world of Doggerland, but I guess first of all let's get an understanding of how far it stretched.
So Doggerland extended as far north as the Shetland Islands. It went right around the northern coast of Scotland, around Ireland, and all the way up to the English Channel.
So you could basically walk from Denmark right across to the UK, and then the Irish Sea wouldn't have been there. You could walk across to Ireland. That's amazing.
I can't get over that this huge landmass is supposed to have been here only 10,000 years ago.
What proof do we have that it existed?
Yeah, so from about the 1930s onwards, we started to get records coming in from fishermen who were trawling the seabed in the North Sea, and they were recording all sorts of strange artefacts. Nobody really picked up on it properly until about the 1990s, and then there started to be a real hype about what Doggerland is.
That's amazing. I didn't realise that it was such recent knowledge.
Since the 1990s, scientists have conducted scans of the seabed, revealing that Doggerland wasn't just some little land bridge. It was the heart of Europe, a thriving place for animals and early humans. The question is, will Steve find any signs of its existence?
So where's Steve diving?
He's going to Boldner Cliff, just off the northern coast of the Isle of Wight, which is the only submerged prehistoric site in the UK. It's quite sheltered here and protected, so an archaeologist's dream.
That sounds amazing.
It looks like there's a real chance we may find something beneath the waves. I've dived archaeological sites before,
But this will be the first time that I dive back into the Ice Age. I have an idea of what we might see, but there's still a real sense of the unknown.
I'm very optimistic. We're sure he's going to find something.
we make our final dive checks before we take the plunge. Gary first dived the area at Boulder Cliff in 1998, where the remains of a forest were discovered. He's since led over 800 dives to this incredible prehistoric site and found ancient oak tree roots, as well as signs of human activity.
Dive and Steve to surface, dive and Steve to surface, into the comms check, close check. Can you hear me? Loud and clear.
After checking our underwater comms are working, we now follow a dive line 11 meters down to the seafloor. 10,000 years ago, this would have been land, next to a riverbed. But visibility is worse than we expected.
It's kind of like diving in leek and potato soup. I can't see anything at all. It's so incredibly eerie and mysterious down here. It's exactly the kind of place you expect to find some ancient treasure. Wow! And these roots! The roots are still remarkably intact. Wow! It's a tree stump! This is all wood!
Looking closer, we can tell this was an oak tree. It could be up to 10,000 years old, and clearly oaks don't grow underwater.
This is all the remains of a forest that would have covered this part of Doggerland. Completely blows my mind. That where we're swimming now was dry land. Utterly extraordinary.
It's one thing finding an ancient forest, but the next level would be finding signs early humans actually lived here. But the poor water visibility is making things incredibly challenging. Then I hit a problem.
Gary, can you hear me?
I've lost sight of my underwater guide, Gary Momba, and the dive line leading back to the dive boat on the surface.
Gary, can you hear me?
It looks like I may have lost comms with Gary.
Gary, this is Steve. We appear to have lost you and the line.
Thankfully, just as I was getting concerned, Gary emerges from the gloomy waters. He's pointing a few meters behind me.
Loads of pieces of flint. Wow.
It's clear we're in an area where our early ancestors lived and worked, as there are flint tools everywhere.
Yeah. That's clearly a shard from a tool-making process. You can see that the edges here are still sharp. Try and imagine someone sat on a sandbar chipping away at tools on what is now the seabed on the bottom of the English Channel. Check that out. Absolutely amazing. Okay, I'm pretty much out of air, so I think we should head up.
We swim to the surface, where I'm desperate to take a better look at our discoveries and find out what these early settlers used this site for.
Well, that was not like any other dive I've done before, but one of the most spectacular.
And they tell you so much about the people at the time.
So that one there, that was just sticking out of the mud like that. But it's that bit that's interesting, isn't it?
It is. Look at it closely. When you hand like that, feel that? Just fits perfectly.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
And they would have been using it to scrape hides. And they were camping there, and there were lots and lots of worked flints, so they're making little fires, little parties, napping flints.
So it's quite something. They're coming there, having a cook up, having a barbie.
So that tells you a story about the people that lived here 8,000 years ago.
We are the first people to hold that in our hands for at least 8,000 years. That is the most extraordinary thought.
Our discoveries will be preserved by Gary's team as they continue their excavation at Boulder Cliff. So far, they've recovered 1,000 flints and even the remains of a dugout canoe, which suggests that where we dived may have been the oldest known boat-building yard on the planet.
It's clear early humans were thriving where Steve dived, but we know Doggerland was just about to be wiped away. Claire believes the answers to why this ancient world disappeared can be found within sediment cores retrieved from the bottom of the sea.
So this is a sediment core, and this tells us the story of the end of Doggerland, doesn't it?
Absolutely. At the bottom, we've got this brown, black sediment. Now, this is peat, and it's been completely squashed and compressed, and there could be up to 3,000 to 4,000 years of history just in this section here.
So there's a very clear line here where the peat changes into this lighter colour. So what story does that tell us?
We've gone into this grey, sort of clay sediment. Now, in here, there are tiny little shells. So this shows us a transition from land to sea, which is ultimately the final flooding of Doggerland.
So how long ago was that?
Around 8,000 years ago.
So that marks the end of Doggerland. It was all dry land, and now we know it as the sea. But was that a gradual change, or was it a dramatic event?
Well, looking at this core, it looks like it was a gradual change, but in other cores from the North Sea, we see evidence of the Strachan tsunami.
The rising sea levels made it harder for early humans to survive. Those that remained on Doggerland couldn't have known just how dangerous their situation was.
What on earth is the Strachan tsunami?
Strachan is just off the coast of Norway, and around 8,200 years ago, there was a huge tsunami that went all across the North Sea.
The Strachan tsunami was caused by an almighty underwater landslide that shifted nearly 2,000 cubic miles of sediment. That's enough to cover New York City in over 600 feet of debris. This monumental landslide created a mega tsunami with a wave over 65 feet tall that helped to wipe out Doggerland. It was this mass flooding that helped shape the coastline of the United Kingdom as we know it today.
So this line right here shows the final inundation of Doggerland, and this is when Britain became an island. So some people might argue that that is actually the original Brexit.
The Strachan tsunami was the final catastrophic nail in the coffin for Doggerland. Between this and the melting ice sheets, the UK was cut off from Europe permanently. Sea levels rose 30 feet higher than they are today, and the face of the planet was changed forever.
So just how did our ancient ancestors deal with the end of Doggerland and the fast-rising seas that were swallowing their homelands? As ever, Gary Momba has a theory.
With a changing world, rising sea levels, a place that is inundated with new waterways, some kind of watercraft would have been world-changing.
Everything was disrupted, so people then had to adapt. And the way they adapted was by turning to the water and developing boats to give themselves access from A to B.
The one that we know best is a coracle, and this is made of a frame of, I'm guessing, willow?
Yes, willow. A lot of willow around this neck of the woods.
And on the outside is a cured hide, which is waterproof.
And interestingly, just the other day when we were diving, this is what you found on the seabed, this nice scraper. And this sort of thing would have been used to scrape down hides just like this.
In the new water world, having something like this to enable you to go places that no one else could would have been such an advantage.
Especially around the rivers and lakes which are forming from nowhere, and people could just move across the waterways quite freely.
It's one thing talking about these boats, it's another using them. I think it's time for me to paddle out of the Ice Age. These early boats enabled our ancient ancestors to cover greater distances and even allowed those living in the UK to trade with tribes in Northern Europe.
Modern watercraft are all sleek and slender and great at going fast in straight lines. So you look at a coracle and think, why? Why have a circular boat like this? But the answer is quite clear. The second you hoist it onto your back, it's portability. This is easier to carry than any of the modern boats, the canoes and kayaks that I use. And being able to cross marshland and swampland and go in and out of the water, picking the boat up on your back like this is just priceless.
But I'm not sure I'd fancy a 21-mile trip over the newly formed English Channel to France in a circular boat made from stretched leather and willow. Not exactly confidence-inspiring.
But I guess the proof of the pudding's in the eating, so let's get in. Okay.
No pressure, as everyone waits and hopes for me to fall in.
Whoa, that's spooky. That is proper spooky. It's all about keeping centered now. Actually, it's better than I thought. I kind of imagined I would be spinning about all over the place. And certainly if you were just to use a conventional paddle stroke, then you just go round and round in circles. But if you move the paddle in an S shape, you can pull yourself along pretty well. That is actually fantastic. I'm genuinely impressed. So it's never going to go fast. You can imagine if you were to want to sit in one place and try and catch a fish, actually, it's pretty stable. So for all of its ease and its portability, you feel pretty vulnerable if you were out in a big river system on this. And even the smallest waves would be slopping up into the boat and making you feel even more unsteady. But on a day like today, honestly, I don't think a modern boat could beat it.
And from here, the human race enters the modern age. After the invention of the coracle, we advance at an incredible speed. Farming begins. We start trading with Europe and then the rest of the world. In the blink of an evolutionary eye, we go from living in caves to cities with the dawn of the industrial age. We see the invention of the combustion engine, an incredible technology, but our high-tech lives come at a cost. Michaela is back in Arctic Svalbard. It's hard to believe, but this frozen world is actually the fastest warming region on the planet. She's meeting Dr. Liz Thomas, a climate scientist for the British Antarctic Survey, to find out how climate change is speeding up the end of the Ice Age.
Liz, you're all packed up.
Yep, all ready to go.
Liz is a leading expert in ice core science, drilling deep into ancient ice to find out how our addiction to fossil fuels is heating up the planet.
So when I look at the snow, I think about all the information that it actually contains, and that helps us to understand how the climate has been changing.
Until relatively recently, the Ice Age was still a real mystery. But some of the clues to the puzzle are in the ice.
Exactly, yeah. So ice core science is relatively new, and it's only really in the last kind of 50 years that we've started drilling ice cores, and that for the first time showed us how the climate has undergone these quite dramatic changes, particularly the changes in temperature from the last ice age to our present conditions.
We're taking local transport known as a belt wagon, travelling from Longyearbyen, the most northerly town on the planet, to a remote glacier where we're expecting temperatures to be as low as minus 25 degrees Celsius. We're going to drill into the glacier and hopefully remove an ice core, which we'll send back to the laboratory for analysis.
We're going to start then.
Well, do you reckon you want to have a little go at it now, Michaela?
It'd be quite nice to warm up, actually, yeah.
The British Antarctic Survey team have got a good reputation when it comes to groundbreaking scientific discoveries. It was their discovery in 1985 of the hole in the ozone layer caused by man-made aerosols that galvanised the world to ban them.
Right, should we try and pull this one up together?
Come on then.
Okay. It's going to be heavy. You can really feel the weight in that one now, can't you?
That's great.
Oh, it's there, yeah.
It is indeed.
Down here?
That's perfect.
Oh, wow,
And
look
this
at
is the ice core. This ice that we're looking at here could be anything between 1,000 to maybe 3,000 years old. And so we can actually learn an awful lot from this very small section.
The ice core will be returned to Liz's lab for testing. In order to examine the ice core, it's cut down to 3 centimetre thick sections, melted slowly on a hot plate kept at 20 degrees Celsius, before being piped through tubes into the laboratory next door. Here, gases released from the bubbles trapped in the ice should reveal what's in store for humanity in the future.
And this is a section of ice from Antarctica that actually goes back into the last ice age. So what you can see is inside here, these are the bubbles that have been trapped as that snow fell and then became compacted. It's actually the air that the Neanderthals were breathing in.
That's very cool, or should I say very freezing cold. Okay, that really is amazing, isn't it?
It is.
So out of the freezer into the warmth of the lab, and this is obviously where you collect all the data, Liz.
Yes, so on the other side of this wall is the melt head. So that liquid is being drawn down through all of these tubes.
And then you collect the air bubbles as well?
Yes, so the air bubbles we can see are coming through here.
Liz analyses the concentration of methane trapped in the air bubbles. This greenhouse gas traps the sun's heat within our atmosphere. Higher levels lead to melting ice caps. By measuring the concentrations along the length of ice cores, Liz can show me how much the planet's temperature has varied over the course of the last 800,000 years.
And what we can see is there's very natural cycles between the extreme cold conditions down here, and then up there we've got these relatively warm conditions.
It's a natural cycle taking place every 100,000 years when the Earth's orbit changes and it gets closer to the sun, triggering the Great Thaw. But that natural process changes dramatically 170 years ago when greenhouse gases skyrocket.
Is that the spike in the Industrial Revolution?
Exactly. So what we're seeing here is from the 1850s when we really started to ramp up the burning of fossil fuels and heavy industry.
Since the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the combustion engine, CO2 levels have increased by 100%. That's a phenomenal surge in just a few years. And now we're living in the hottest period for 125,000 years.
That really rams it home, doesn't it?
That's the bit that's quite alarming. We're in the unknown, so really it's trying to understand how the planet, how the climate is going to respond to these big increases.
Svalbard is on the front line of global warming. What happens here will affect all of our lives. In the last 100 years, the glacier has retreated by 7 kilometres, and by the end of this century, it's estimated that the winter temperature will be 10% warmer.
Our planet is warming up, accelerated by human activity. So what's going to happen now?
Well, as the planet warms, we're going to start to see we're melting ice on land, we're melting our mountain glaciers, as well as our big ice sheets. So we're going to see sea level rise, more chaotic weather patterns, more storminess. We're moving into a period of very unpredictable, warmer climate.
Across the globe, the deadly effects of extreme climate change are being felt. Sunny Texas was hit by a freak snowstorm, leaving millions without power, and over 200 people froze to death. Across Europe, high temperatures have led to catastrophic wildfires. Heat waves were once a freak rarity, but now they're likely to be a deadly annual event. Pakistan was hit by devastating floods caused by climate change that have left over 1,000 people dead. Just a 2-degree rise in global temperatures will expose over a third of the Earth's population to extreme heat waves and staggering rises in sea levels that could affect the survival of millions of people.
Are we, the human species, going to survive this climate change?
We as a species are incredibly resilient. So I think in the long term, yes, as a species we will, but it's going to be a very challenging time. We're going to see impacts on the ecosystem, on agriculture, which is going to cause huge problems for humanity. I think there's grim times ahead.
We've seen climate change before. Why is this one so different?
What really makes it different is what we're doing to the atmosphere. We're putting huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So it means the climate is going into uncharted territory. We're probably going to see long-term warming. Even if we stop polluting tomorrow, the climate's going to continue to warm. It's going to take thousands of years to reach an equilibrium.
So to survive, we're going to have to adapt and we're going to have to evolve.
And we're kind of really at, if not past, that point of no return. It's never been more pressing than it is now.
A warming world is clearly a threat, but there's a scientific theory that's hard to get your head around. The big melt caused by global warming could trigger the next ice age. Ocean currents control the Earth's climate. They push hot equatorial waters towards the poles and return cold polar waters to the equator, helping to keep the planet in balance. The most famous is the Gulf Stream, a strong underwater current that brings warm water from the Gulf of Mexico into the Atlantic Ocean, passing Western Europe and the UK on its way to the Arctic. That's why we have a warmer climate and much milder winters compared to countries on the same latitude as us, like Canada, which have freezing winters.
One of the consequences of a warming planet is that the ice sheets and glaciers start to melt, and this melting freshwater enters the oceans.
This extra freshwater will dilute the seawater in the North Atlantic, turning off the warm waters of the Gulf Stream.
The effect of that would be that we could plummet into ice age-like conditions. This kind of scenario is really the basis for these apocalyptic predictions and things like the Day After Tomorrow movies, where we see much of the North Atlantic region suddenly under meters worth of snow.
If this new ice age happened, there would be millions of people heading south for warmth and safety. Explorer and survival expert Reza Pakravan has travelled across the most hostile terrains on the planet and knows what to expect when the world falls apart.
It's all about survival. Survival of the fittest. The world that we know today, it will no longer be relevant. The infrastructures that we are used to will collapse. The world enters complete chaos.
I guess the first instinct would be to head south, as it would have been during Ice Age times when you would have had those most savage periods of deep freeze.
Priority is for you to survive and carry on with your journey towards the equator. There won't be any cars, there won't be any infrastructure, so basically your legs are your main means of transport. What are the most important things that I need to take care of our families and loved ones? So I need to be focused on water, shelter, keeping warm, and food. And it's all about survival.
As the cold comes down from the north, our biggest challenge could be ourselves, could be other people.
There are so many people fighting for a tiny bit of resources. We have to stay away from those people.
We're going to be taken back to basics. The things that, like money, are going to be worthless, and practical, pragmatic things that can put food in our bellies, those are going to be the things that are important.
Obviously, people want those little things that you have. For example, this little knife can create shelters for you. You can use to kill animals. You can do so much with this knife, and that is really precious. That's worth more than millions.
Sounds like a pretty full-on survival situation.
While triggering a new ice age could take thousands of years, the dangers posed by a warming world are happening right now. In Svalbard, preparations to protect humanity from an apocalypse have already begun.
Scientists are thinking and planning for all sorts of environmental catastrophes, and one of the plans they've come up with is in this rather unassuming looking building here. It's a seed vault, and it holds 1 million seed samples and has the capacity to store 4.5 million varieties of crops.
The seed bank extends nearly 400 feet into sandstone rock beneath the ice, ensuring the vault remains frozen even if external air temperatures rise. Seeds are stored at -18 degrees Celsius in moisture-controlled foil packets, allowing some to last for thousands of years.
It's safeguarding the future of the world's food-growing seeds. So if ever there was a disaster, at least we have the seeds to enable us to grow food.
The Ice Age shaped our planet and our species. Now, the Great Melt threatens it all.
Our journey through the Ice Age has revealed a world of wonder. From the frozen glaciers of the north through an ever-changing landscape.
During our Ice Age mission, we have explored a time when megabeasts roamed the land and early humans emerged as the dominant force of life on our planet. And yet, despite threats from megavolcanoes and giant tsunamis, one constant has remained: humanity. But now we face our biggest challenge yet.
We're coming to the end of this Ice Age, and our planet is dramatically warming up. Will our supremacy reign throughout the next climate change, or will we pay the ultimate price for speeding up the process? Or will we learn to adapt to a radically different world? Science has proved that our planet can be resilient to huge climate swings. The big question is, can we?
Softly you whisper my name. In the night we find a flame. Hearts beat in perfect time. Two souls on the sweetest climb. Stars above shining bright, guiding us through the night. We dance under the sky. In your arms I know I can fly. Whispered by the moonlight, love is in full flight. Hand in hand we stand, forever we'll understand. Your eyes hold the key to the dreams we set free. Together we are strong. In your love is where I belong. Your eyes hold the key to the dreams we set free. Together we are strong.